Hello and welcome to Career Conversations. My name is Richard Reda, and this is our monthly career conversation series through the APH Connect Center. Today, we have the honor and privilege of meeting and speaking with Sina Baram, President and CEO of Prime Access Consulting. Sina, welcome to Career Conversations.
Thanks for having me.
Let's go back and talk about your courses in college and how you handled accessibility for course curriculum.
Sure. Well, I'm a blind computer scientist, and so in college, there were a lot of, as you can imagine, STEM courses, right? Science, technology, engineering, and math. And so, whether it was dealing with diagrams or math equations or learning to write code, those are pretty technical topics. And a lot of them present a ton of accessibility challenges and barriers because we have inaccessible curricula, as part of computer science education and as part of physics education. I'm sure that's something many people on this webinar are familiar with. And so for me, it was really a matter of learning all of those things, like how to advocate with professors and communicate with them before the semester starts, all of those best practices, right? I needed books in Braille. And so you don't get to just make that decision in August for the fall semester. You got to know about that ahead of time because there's a lead time in securing that Calculus 3 book, right? And
Yeah.
so that was a lot of learnings like that a lot of non-disabled students, don't have to go through. And then, on the non-accessibility side, I had a really brilliant time. Computer science was amazing. I spent a long time trying not to be the blind guy in accessibility. So I also did everything else you can imagine in computer science, like data visualization and security and bioinformatics and protein folding and like everything. But when I was doing all of that stuff, I was in the position where I had to keep inventing solutions for myself, I had to figure out, how do you make mathematics read on the web? How do you lay your finger down on a graph on a touch screen and have it read that to you? And so that's how I got into accessibility and inclusive design, because I had to make those things for myself and they were helpful for other people as well.
Fantastic. I'm sure that led to many experiences and opportunities. And let's talk about that. What types of jobs or work experiences did you have prior to finding or founding Prime Access Consulting?
Um, a few things. One of the things I did was, oh gosh, I had some interesting jobs over the years. One of them is a buddy of mine had a book company, so he would go around and he would gather books from yard sales and bag sales. Churches and libraries will have these things called bag sales, where you just fill up a bag with books and they charge you $5.
Hmm.
That sort of thing. And we would sell those online, right? So it was this like, whole operation where you had to write code, because we wrote the code for the scanner tool that the people would use at the company. And I was also writing API code, learning how do you interface, how do you get your computer to talk to Amazon's computers to list a post or to, list a product. So that was like some coding experience. And then in another summer job, I wrote indoor location algorithms. So think about GPS, how we all like
Yes.
get around on our phones and in our cars, right?
Mhm.
But how do you do that indoors, right? And so
Yeah.
we made our own radio system and tags for the hospital, and we could track assets in the hospital. Because if you're in surgery and you're a doctor and you need an infusion pump, you need that now. And they're like, oh, I think it's on the third floor. Let me go get it. I mean, you don't have that kind of time, right? You've got a patient who needs something. And so knowing where those assets were in the hospital was really a big deal. So we would tag them with these plastic tags that had radio chips inside of them and batteries. And then those would communicate to these readers we had on the wall. We would use the power lines of the hospital as our modem. We would literally modulate electricity over the power line and be able to then communicate to the electrical closet and then eventually up to a server. And what was cool about that is that involved everything from little tiny microprocessors all the way up to, Java enterprise applications running on the server. So I got a ton of exposure over a few summers to all these different aspects of computing, And then, of course, started doing way more inclusive design and accessibility stuff, which led to Prime Access Consulting.
Fantastic. What a awesome experience to have had a hand in all these things. So Can you tell us what Prime Access Consulting works on?
Sure. Um, we are an inclusive design firm, right? So I'm joined in this work by Corey Timpson, who's my business partner on all things inclusive design. Let's see here. So we build museums. We help other people build museums. For example, the Dot Experience that's happening
Yes.
at APH. We've been heavily involved in that project with folks like Solid Light, who are the design partners on that project, right? And we show folks how to make those things, whether it's a website, whether it's a museum, whether it's a wing of a building, whether it's an entire campus, welcoming to the widest possible audience, be it digital, physical, what have you. And that doesn't just mean, thinking about Braille and visual descriptions and wheelchair access. It really considers the content and the built environment, the lighting, the furniture, right? All of these things contribute to environments being either alienating to disabled folks or inclusive and accessible, right?
Mhm.
And that's what we help designers, fabricators, engineers, operators, you name it, think through their whole process. And most importantly, think about it up front as opposed to after the fact, whereas we all know it's way more expensive and hard to do
Yes.
anything about it. So that's what we do in a nutshell.
Now, are you often with these individual opportunities or customers you have, are you approached at the beginning or middle or end, and do you have a preference? Hopefully, people will come to you first, but are there
Absolutely.
opportunities when they do come to you later going, "Hey, we
There
need
are.
help fixing X, Y, and Z"?
Absolutely. So a lot of times they used to come to us at the end. We built the thing and we'd love to know how accessible it is. That usually doesn't end very well, right? Um, then they started coming to us in the middle. We're almost done building the thing.
Hmm.
Ah, but we were told to maybe reach out, right? Then they
Yeah.
started coming to us even earlier. We're about to build the thing, but we're done with our design, And now they're like, we're thinking of building a thing. Let's involve y'all from day zero, not from day 999 out of 1,000, right? So that's shifted over the life of the company. And that's because we and others have really been pretty, vocal and trying to educate everybody about how early you do this stuff really is the biggest contributor, or is the biggest, I should say, indicator and impact factor of how
Yes.
effective you're going to be. Right? Everything else is going to work itself out, whether the budget is millions of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of dollars. It is that time that you can't do anything about. You can't throw money at that problem.
No.
And that's why you need to do it so upfront. So that has definitely shifted over the years, and we would obviously prefer there's no too early time. Let me put it that way. You can't
Yeah.
come to us too early.
Earlier the better.
Earlier the
That's
better.
great advice. In researching your background, we noticed that there had been work in the United States and in Canada. What are the differences in accessibility requirements in what you do in
Yeah.
countries like in Canada and elsewhere?
Absolutely. I mean, we've done work, yeah, in the US, Canada, parts of South America, Europe, Asia, and they're all different, right? Some places are more litigious than others, right? It's a
Hmm.
lot more lawsuit based, There's this, there's kind of a friend of mine, she has the food inspector model of accessibility. We don't follow that in the US, right? Where
Hmm.
if you go to a restaurant, it's not your job as the customer to go back into the kitchen and be like, are you washing your hands? Are you using a clean cooking surface? It's like there's a food
Hmm.
inspector, right? And they go
Yes.
around and they do that. That's not true for accessibility. Nobody's there inspecting, the wheelchair access, the Braille menu exists or not, the website is accessible, right? It's always because somebody who's disabled has the burden of raising that complaint, and then you have mechanisms like the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and so forth to do something about it. But think about that. The burden is always on the disabled person, right? Which is
Right.
not right. So in other countries, that's not necessarily true, right? So that's one distinction. Another one is in Canada, they have the National Languages Act. So that means that when you do stuff, especially like for a federal museum, so Corey, my business partner, he built the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, right? And so he was a project director on that project. It was a massive project, and they had to do everything in English and French. So what does that mean, right? What does that mean for
Yes.
Braille layout? What does that mean for wayfinding signage? What does that mean for captions? What does that mean for audio description, right? Because now you have to do it in multiple languages. So
Yes.
just tons of differences there. But here's the cool part. It's really amazing because when you get exposure to those kinds of constraints, those are opportunities, right? Those are like amazing opportunities to solve a problem. We don't view that as a challenge. We view that as like
Yes.
this welcome thing. And then we can take those learnings and bring it elsewhere. So now we have a client, for example, in the US, and they're like, I want to do English and Spanish. No problem. We know how to do dual languages in Braille, right? That's the
Great.
kind of stuff that you can just keep building on it, right?
How exciting. Tell us about your knowledge in multiple computer languages. Has that something you gained just through academia, or did you learn that elsewhere? And how do you stay up to date on all these
Yeah,
emerging obviously curriculums to be
totally.
relevant, on top of your game?
Absolutely. It's a big deal. So both. The answer to it is both. Both before, during, and after
Mhm.
university, right? I was coding as a kid. Kind of got into it pretty early on. I'd say as a teenager, but even before that, like when I was really young, I was just messing around in DOS and old
Yes.
operating command line operating system. Most of the folks on this call may not be familiar with. Um, but so that's one way, just interest and passion. But it's also because I noticed very early on, even as a kid, even as a teenager, that there was far less of a negative consequence of being blind when programming
Yeah.
than, for example, when doing certain other things. And that's not to say that certain other things are not able to be done wonderfully by other blind folks, but for me, that was my experience. And
Yes.
so, to that end, it really grabbed my attention because it meant I can put effort into this and I can be kind of judged based on, my brain and not my inability to see, if that makes sense.
Right.
you know? And so, to answer the second part of your question, how do I keep up to speed with this stuff? I read a lot, right?
Yeah.
I'm browsing Reddit, I'm browsing, Hacker News, I'm browsing Ars Technica and other digital websites, right? I know I'm up to speed on like consumer electronics and stuff because I'm a gearhead. I like that stuff. I follow that stuff. And so it's easy to sort of stay atop a lot of the field.
Yeah.
I'm not deep diving, right? Like back in
Right.
the day, I could just whip out an algorithm for you. Now I'm gonna
Yeah.
probably be reaching for ChatGPT,
Right.
because it's not what I'm doing every day, but I have folks on my staff that is what they do every day. And
Yeah.
in fact, both of the developers that we have at Pack are blind, right? And so it's really cool to just see that discipline evolve over the years.
So it seems as if there are fewer barriers into the type of work you do, but I'm sure at some point have you faced barriers as a blind individual seeking employment or volunteering to participate in some kind of a hacking-a-thon or some kind of event that would really better improve the outcome?
All the time, all the time. Even, I mean, look, I run a company. I've got the notoriety and success, etc. That doesn't do anything about the systemic ableism that exists in our world, right? I
Hmm.
go through airports probably 100 times a year. I fly a lot. I'm
Sure.
constantly traveling for clients and projects and things like this. Travel is not a terribly accessible process, right? You get it
Right.
done. It's
Right.
doable. It's fine. But, there's just a lot of those kinds of barriers. So it's not one thing. It's more like which 12 things happen today?
Yes. Yes.
And that I think is a really important thing for people to know that, well, A, it's not just you. And B, every time one encounters a barrier like that, that is what we talk about, at PAC when we're working with our clients is like, this is the extra labor, right? That every
Yes.
disabled person has to perform simply to operate at parity with non-disabled folks, like in your space, right? To access
Yes.
your movie, to access your digital interactive, to access your classroom, right? And so that's what we're trying to minimize, right? That's what that extra labor, we're trying to get rid of that so that people can have an equitable experience and not be exhausted, but
Yes.
rather be delighted at the end of it.
Absolutely. For individuals who might be interested in computer programming and doing the type of work you do or your colleagues do or
Mhm.
similar fields, what advice do you have for them? The young adult, maybe 18, just out of
Yeah.
high school, looking at their career, or maybe the 40-year-old who's doing a career change. They lost their vision, but this is
Yeah.
intriguing to them. What are your thoughts or advice on
Yeah,
that?
I would say do it. Like there's so many entry points into programming. You don't have to go to university, but that can help if you want to be a computer scientist. You don't have to go to a coding boot camp. In fact, I don't really recommend them. you can learn some of that stuff on your own. There's amazing resources on YouTube. There are incredible things you can now do with AI. So for example, you can ask ChatGPT to give you a programming problem to test, right?
Yes.
Like give me a few programming problems. I'm a first year developer. I've only been studying for 6 months, and it'll say, okay, here's a homework assignment, right?
Yeah.
There's just a lot that you can do today that is such a world different than, when I was learning, like when I was teaching myself C++, which is this very hardcore, low level programming language. Um, I was using something called Homepage Reader back in, I'm dating myself a little bit here. IBM Homepage Reader with the
Yeah.
Netscape browser. I had to
Remember
find an
that?
HTML version of a book. I probably grabbed it off Bookshare. So, like, do you know what I like? It was a whole different world. And now, within like 7 seconds of Google, like you've got tutorials and practice problems and websites where you can code, and it'll tell you if your solution is correct, and AI and like all of these other tools, right? Like Code Jumper from APH, for example. Like there's just so many resources now. But I want to make one thing clear. I don't want to
Yes.
say or give the false impression it's all, green fields and unicorns. You know what I mean? There's still accessibility challenges. There are still people who do not describe their images. There are still folks who describe an algorithm, pictorially instead of in text. Like those are real challenges. The difference for me is there's a lot more workarounds these days. I can take
Yes.
that inaccessible image, slap it over to an AI, and have it describe it to me. Is it absolutely accurate? No. Is it always going to get it right or understand what's there? No. But is it also getting better literally every single month? Yes. And so there's just a lot more hope I see in some of those just death by a thousand cuts things
Hmm.
getting minimized and minimized as we go forward. That doesn't mean though there's not a ton of work to do to make curricula, education environments, and everything else more inclusive, more accessible.
So, let's take a little deeper dive into artificial intelligence and what that means on the work that you do. And what are the guardrails? How is it impacting the work you do positively? What are
Yeah.
some of the worries you have? And what is your advice to those amateurs out there or novice folks who are just dabbling with AI and accessibility?
Well, I would say learn it, because this is kind of like, everybody's talking about this electricity thing. And you can either be the person who's like, I don't, that's a fad. That's not going to go anywhere. Or you can hop on that train. So
Sure.
I'm firmly in the camp of this is not only here to stay, but is going to be the most instrumental tool that humans have created to date. And that I include in that things like the internet and the World
Yes.
Wide Web, and computers, in general. And so my view on it is that it is an incredibly powerful tool. And much like any technology, I've said this many times, that technology is a magnifying glass. It
Yes.
makes the good stuff amazing, just really incredible. And it makes the bad stuff real bad, like
Yeah.
really bad. It's a magnifying glass. And so why don't we use that to magnify some good, right? And amplify some
Yes.
good. And so I would use it. I would use it for coding tasks, but I wouldn't just, deploy that code into production. I would use it as a learning tool. I would use it to help me test my code. I would use it to bang out a script. We had to write a game for a client. We're helping them build a museum, and we wrote a game to popularize that at a conference. I wrote the
Hmm.
whole web app with ChatGPT on an airplane. Right.
Wow.
And I didn't know the framework or anything. I was like, sure, just, like I needed to do this, and I tweaked it, but I could read and understand all the code. So I
Yeah.
could be an expert user of it, not just have to trust that what it gave me was correct, right? That's the big difference there. So those are all the
Right.
positives. The other positive I'll list is it's incredible for the labor reduction of visual descriptions. Okay, we have museum clients that have not hundreds, not thousands, not tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands to millions of objects.
Hmm.
Even if you wave a magic wand and you pay 100 people full-time salaries, it ain't getting done. It's a volume problem,
Yeah.
right? You cannot, again, it's one of those things. I can't throw money at it. Think about the Smithsonian, how many tens of millions of objects they have in their collection, right?
Right.
Only like a fraction of 1% is on view at any point in time.
Hmm.
So how do you describe all of that, right? This is where AI comes in handy. Because with one person, they may be able to write 10, 20, 30 good, really solid visual descriptions a day. But with AI, they may be able to author 200 to 300 a day, right? So this is an order of magnitude amplification of visual description capabilities. It doesn't mean you just have the computer do it and you trust it. It means you spend a lot of time telling the computer how to do it in a good, ethical, fair, and appropriate way, and then you edit those results and you have a human review process. So that's the good side. On the bad side, I think that people are going to be pretty lazy. I think
Hmm.
that eventually we're going to get to the point where it's like, look, good enough for ChatGPT, good enough for me,
Hmm.
kind of thing, and slap the solution in. And maybe when that is editing a spreadsheet, and that spreadsheet contains the budget for the inclusive design or accessibility accommodations, and then that number accidentally gets turned into a zero or doesn't get included in the next version, that's not great, right? So like I see a lot of like this transition period where we trust it a little bit more than we should in some places, and we don't trust it as much as or use it as much as we should in other places. But
Yeah.
honestly, that's not new. That happens with every new technology. We'll get our footing and figure it out.
Fantastic, and thank you for that. One of my last questions here, and then I'll turn it over to Katie for some questions, who I bet has a question or two, and then we'll take it to our audience for a Q&A. So please put your questions out there, and we'll get to them. You're above everything you've talked about. You're at the heart of the thing. You're an entrepreneur. You're a business owner. Why go that route versus going to work for a company or corporation? And what are some things that people out there who think they want to be their own boss or business owner or entrepreneur should think about, especially in the business that you do in computer technology?
Well, there's a couple of things. I think the first one is, I was really toying with the idea of staying in academia. So I'm ABD and a PhD in computer science. So what that means is all but dissertation. I did all the work, did all the coursework, did all the research, didn't write the dissertation, right? Because I went off to go form the company and
Sure.
work on projects like the Canadian Museum for Human Rights and things like this. Um, so I made that decision because I looked around academia and I decided I didn't want to spend like 90% of my life fundraising on grants.
Yes.
A lot of my comp sci, a lot of my computer science professors, they didn't really have a lot of cycles to do the hardcore computer science work they got to do in the 90s. They got to do in the 2000s and stuff. It was just this like constant hamster wheel of fundraising and writing NSF grants and all of these, and that did not appeal to me at all. And the other thing was that I had experience with startups, like that hospital asset tracking, project, et cetera, et cetera. So I knew what it felt like at a small company, and that was pretty cool to me because you can move fast, and you can try things, but there's a lot of pressure because if you don't succeed, you go out of business. And
Yes.
for some people, that's a bad thing. Like that's a negative thing. I like that, right? Like when I think of air traffic controller or one of these high stakes jobs, I'm into that. I'm like, okay,
Right.
I'm going to stay awake for this one. Like it's really
Yes.
important. So for me, it was a fact of like the stakes are high enough and I could have enough impact, right?
Yes.
The stuff that I get to work on with certain museums, millions of people come through the door every year. I
Right.
just couldn't do that if I had some of my other job, prospects that I was looking at, right? Because I was a
Right.
computer science student. I had a lot of job offers on the table, Silicon Valley, that kind of thing. And I chose actively, and it was hard at the time because those are big salaries to turn down when you're, a college graduate with no money in the bank. And I was like, nah, I'm gonna do this company thing. I really want to do it. And that's best decision I ever made. In terms of advice, I would say look around and identify a deep unresolved need, right? Wants are
Yes.
fine. Like you can make businesses out of those as well. But if you have solved a deep and you have a solution for it, if you have a solution for a deep unresolved need, um, you probably have a business idea there, right?
Yes.
And then it's a matter of is that your jam? Is that your deal? Does that bring you joy to go
Yes.
start a business? I think it's incredible that I get to mentor people and give people opportunities to have a job, especially disabled people
Right.
that otherwise, frankly, wouldn't. And that bet that I've made on those folks,
Yeah.
oh, I mean, it's paid back 1,000 times over to see the stuff that folks at PAC are doing. I like it. I just can't be prouder, right? Like that's
Right.
awesome to have been part of like facilitating that opportunity. That's amazing.
Right.
That's what I get out of it. Oh,
Okay.
and one last thing. I don't
Yes.
I don't think I do well having a boss.
Right, right, right. I totally get that. I mean, some people are built to be a boss or have a
Yep.
boss, or my fun question is, you've traveled hundreds of times a years. Is there a
Yeah.
favorite place in the world you like to travel to for fun
Oh
or to
gosh.
work
I have
or
many
places?
favorites. I love Toronto. It's
Hmm.
just a lot of fun. New York is always a blast, but I get tired of it really quickly
Yeah,
because, frankly, I'm getting a little bit older, and
yeah,
I hate hearing traffic when I'm trying to sleep.
yes,
And it's hard to escape in New York. Chicago has incredible food.
yes.
California has incredible tacos. The taco scene in LA is lit.
It's true.
Like, so I think I can find something cool anywhere. There's an amazing cocktail bar in Cleveland that I like to go to. I mean, it's just, every city has its charm. You gotta find where it's at. And I'm a huge foodie. I like different cuisines and different
Yes.
genres of food. So travel is like it's perfect because I don't have to be stuck with the restaurants here in Cary, North Carolina.
And it's a business expense, so
That's true.
so that's great. Let's ask Katie. Katie Frederick, do you have any questions before we go to the audience?
So I think, you may have touched on this a little bit in the beginning, but went to college and decided to study computer science, but
Mhm.
what was there anyone that kind of led you there, or how did did you have
Ah,
mentors, and how did that impact your um
yeah. Well, two things to that. So first, I didn't think I was going to go to university for computer science. I was very technical on computers and teaching myself programming, etc. But I thought I was going to go to school for astrophysics and quantum mechanics and all
Hmm.
that kind of stuff, right? That was my passion. I was reading Stephen Hawking's book when I was a teenager, and all that kind of like you can tell the nerds early, right?
Right.
And that's all well and good. Um, but I just kept getting drawn back to computing again and again and again because like I could do stuff, right? I could type some things on a keyboard and change an entire world, whether it's a game world, whether it's a text world, whatever. It's really it's a rush. It's like a lot of power that you have in a
Yeah.
computing platform. And I could change things for good. I could, for example, the other day I wrote a Python script that goes through any folder of images. It scans, it finds all of the images, it sends them off to ChatGPT. It generates a short and a long visual description for me, stuffs them in a folder, and renames all the JPEG files for me so that I know what the image is. You know what I mean? Like,
Wow.
come on, like I
we
didn't
all
have that 20 years ago.
Right.
need that now.
Yeah.
I'll
And
take
so
that.
so that was like, I don't know, 50 lines of Python. And fun fact, I had ChatGPT write 80% of it. Right. And so like that to me is amazing. Is to be able to go from I wish something could do this
Yeah.
to I can make it do that. It's like a magic power. And
Yeah.
so that's for me why I got into computing. But I didn't, to your point, I didn't start there. I thought I was going to go the physics route. And I still to this day read like, physics papers and everything because I love that stuff.
Wow. Thank you.
That's really
I think
cool.
we do have a question or two out there, Katie.
Please.
We do. Yes. So, someone is asking how you overcome the challenges, or
Mhm.
how do you address the issues when clients you're working with say, oh, but it's not cost effective for
Mhm.
accessibility, or we don't think that many people with disabilities will use this.
Sure. Sure. Well, there's two things. My clients don't say that because I fire them if they do. So let's just be very clear. All right. So that's a privileged answer. That's the flippant privileged answer for you. It took a while to get there, but that's we only take on business where the client passes the vibe check. Okay. They gotta be in it, and they gotta be in it in a committed way. If they're in there to check a box, they can happily go give their money to another company. I don't want anything to do with it, right? Full stop. I'm not interested. So that's how I make sure that our work is super rewarding and productive and not full of those conversations. But there's another part of that question, which is that's all well and good. Good for you, Sina. What about the 99.999% of the rest of the world that has to deal with that conversation all the time? And I do too, especially at conferences and when trying to convince, large projects to maybe consider this stuff. And you got to meet people where they are. So you got to ask yourself, who is the person that is saying that it's not cost effective? Is it somebody, first of all, in a decision-making authority? Because if it's
Mhm.
not, I frankly don't care what they have to say in this particular context. I want to go to the decision maker and see what they have to say about that problem, right? But let's say
Mhm.
it is. Let's say it's the CFO of the company, the chief financial officer, right? And so I would tell that person, you realize that 25% of the world's population identifies as disabled. That's 2 billion people. That in the US, there's $690 billion of discretionary income spent by disabled people and their families. And those numbers are old as of 4 or 5 years ago. So that number is probably actually closer to $1 trillion now. Globally, the number is $2 to $3 trillion in terms of discretionary income. And so you're leaving a fourth of your profits on the table. If you want to do that, be my guest, but it's not the choice I would make as an entrepreneur, right? I would tell that person that when you look at accessibility, it's very easy to put, oh, I have to pay for sign language in the liabilities column, in the costs column. But are you also accounting for the fact that you got more sales, that you got more people through the door, that you got more visitation because you offered sign language, because you offered Braille, because you offered a touch tour, right? So we need to meet people where they are, understand what the misconception is, then not get mad at them, but instead educate to get them to where we need them to be. And the same answer applies for engineers who say that, or designers who say that, right? We give them practical examples and make it hard for them to say no. In fact, they go, never knew that. I didn't think about it that way before. Oh, that makes sense, right? And so that's the way to do it. And the other thing is, a lot of times we fall into the trap as people who are pro accessibility and pro inclusive design. Oh, yeah, it does cost something. And it does, don't get me wrong, right? But it also has the potential to save money on projects because many times we've made accessibility and inclusive design suggestions that then have resulted in everything getting better, not just for disabled folks, for absolutely everybody. And it's actually been done in an efficient way, right? Whether it's technically or whether it's financially or operationally. So we bring all of these talking points, all of these examples to those conversations and try to get people to where they need to be. But you don't always succeed. So you need to learn when to cut your losses and move on to the next thing. The world is a deeply inaccessible place. So you always have an opportunity to have that conversation again.
I
Fantastic. I have a few. I don't know if there was another question, Katie, but let me slip this one in, Sina. Are you able to share, or are there museums out there that you've had either had an impact on, or museums that you like to visit that are super accessible for a blind guy or gal to go
Mhm.
to and go, man, that's a place I should tell everyone about on Career Conversations because it's from top to bottom, head to toe. It's just cool. It has every feature that I would ever want out of a museum or any public place that whether you've had an impact on or you've just been to that you think should be known.
Yeah, there's this museum opening in Louisville, I heard. I don't know, like maybe
Right? Couple about
that
a
one.
year?
Yeah, about a year, I think. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously things like the dot experience where inclusive design have been baked in from the beginning. I would
Yes.
say other museums, they have portions of this stuff figured out. Okay.
Sure.
So for example, like at Canadian Museum for Human Rights, we pioneered like the keypad and that worked with touch screens. This was back in the day. This was like when iOS was the voiceover and stuff was first getting mature back in like
Sure.
2010, 2012 era. And so, we had dual approach there, and it also, the keypad for digital interactives helps people with wrist support and other, difficulties using a touch screen. That museum also had a commitment to Braille and touch objects and things like this. The video and the media in that museum is super accessible because of the affordances we put in, like sign language, transcripts, captions, multiple languages, audio description, all that good stuff.
Hmm.
There's a museum in Boise, Idaho. Of all places, Boise, Idaho, Boise Art Museum. She's the director there, Melanie. She's got touch objects. She has visual descriptions. In fact, we just wrote a grant right now. It's actually submitted to describe the rest of her collection. Every item in the collection, 4,000 plus items. It's a smaller museum, art museum.
Yeah.
We're going to describe every single one of them. Every single one of them, right? It's got QR codes where you can scan, and then an American Sign Language video comes up of deaf folks from Boise interpreting, signing the interpretation label, right? So
Wow.
like that's an amazing example for me.
Yeah.
Other museums, have very good like touch tours, things like this. So I wouldn't point to a single one, but I would say that there are there are good portions at various ones. And what
Yes.
we're doing now is and over the past couple of years, we've been working on projects where all the things I mentioned and a
Hmm.
thousand times more is getting woven in so that we can say that place has all the things. And that's places like the Dot Experience. That's places like, the upcoming Museum of the Blind People's Movement that we're helping build. That's
Ah, yes.
places like National Geographic, and things like this. So it's it's um it's one of those things that is constantly evolving, but depends on what you're into, what your locale is, and what specifically you're looking for. Because there's no one museum right now that does it all.
Thank you. Any other questions, Katie?
I am not seeing any right now.
Sina, what is your hope for an accessible future? Like, I know this is broad and overarching, but what do you hope to see in the next 40 or 50 years of your career, and in the work you do, or just in the world we live in as blind people? Like, what do you hope?
I hope to, I mean this with all sincerity, be out of a job.
Right,
Like I do not, at least out of this job,
yeah,
I'd really like to run a vineyard. I think that sounds really fun.
right,
Like that sounds amazing. So,
yeah,
but if 40 to 50 years is such a long time horizon, and
right,
just think about where we were 50 years ago, right? So 50 years ago was 1975.
yeah,
Micro transistors, the started becoming popular, right? Intel, I think, had released their first processor, the 8086, right? It had like, I don't know, it was measured in kilohertz. It had like a kilobyte of RAM, right? It could barely store 1,000, characters. Like that's just such a different world than where we live now. Even 20 years ago,
yeah. Oh,
YouTube
yeah.
just come
Even
out, the
5 years
iPhone,
ago.
Yes.
even 5 years ago, right?
Yeah,
And so when I think 50 years in advance, I'm thinking we're not going to be using screens, right?
right,
We're not going to be using microphones and things like this because that's all going to be embedded, right?
yeah,
I can just, give you a little spray or a little pill you're going to take when you're a kid or whatnot. And then those little nanites are going to simply flow through your bloodstream and, just live in your ear and live beside your nose and live beside your eyes and live beside your visual cortex, and
yeah.
I can then directly implant information into your head. And that should be both amazing and also terrifying, right?
Yes, yes,
Because that also means that the Google ads can put info into your head.
yep,
And I don't want that.
right,
So, like, that's the part that's really interesting to me is like, how do we take the learnings that of both good stuff and bad stuff that has come out of tech today and not repeat the same mistakes, but with way deeper consequences 40 to 50 years from now. And then the other thing I hope is very much a thing is that we can have this convo on Mars. We can have this convo on the moon.
yeah,
Um, and then that's something else that I'm really passionate about, like with the Astro Access program, et cetera, is making space travel accessible for disabled people because we need to not perpetuate the same mistakes we made with automobiles and boats and trains and airplanes when we talk about space travel. And that's not a sci-fi and fictitious thing to say. This is
right,
real. This is happening. People are going into orbit and people are building space hotels. That's not fantasy land. People are plowing billions of dollars into building space hotels.
sure,
That's a for real thing. And so wouldn't it be cool if those were born inclusive? Those were born accessible, as
yep,
opposed to perpetuating the same, kind of ableistic architectural decisions and engineering and design decisions that are made here on Earth. So that's kind of where my head goes 40 to 50 years from now. But
yeah.
really, I want to be sipping on my own wine at a vineyard.
Right. You speak, in a lot of reference to the singularity,
Yeah,
in
for
Morris
sure.
Kurzweil. Absolutely. So,
Absolutely.
um, brilliant stuff. I want to thank you for spending the afternoon with us in Career Conversations. We've been doing this for 2 years, and we are thankful to have folks like you who have brilliant minds and ideas from all over the world to share career conversations. One last question is, do you have a LinkedIn presence if a blind or low
I
vision
do.
person?
Yeah,
How would they find you on LinkedIn?
sure thing. So look for Sina, Sina, Bahram, Bahram, and I should come right up. In fact, I think I've got a short link for LinkedIn, which I'm literally going to my website right now to grab for you.
Okay.
LinkedIn. Here we go. Okay. Yep, it is. It's linkedin.com slash in slash Sina Bahram.
Fantastic.
Um, and yeah, and feel free to connect on there. If you're somebody who's interested in accessibility, inclusive design, happy to chat. Just don't take any delays in me responding as me not being interested. It's just a factor of being busy, but I usually go through my LinkedIn inbox, once a month or a few times a month as I get to it. But email is where I live. I live in my email inbox.
Fantastic. Again, Sinabaram, thank you so much for participating in Career Conversations.
Thank you for having me.